and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And this evening we have Larry Holcombe, a longtime UFO researcher, is going to be on the show. I believe he lives in Texas. I hope I'm not wrong about that. Anyway, he seems like a fine gentleman, and he'll be joining us in a little bit. And we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the news, UFO news, just a little bit of news this week in just a moment. And I want to thank everyone that supports the show. It really helps a lot. We do have a lot of expenses to run this thing. And you can help us out by spending only $2 a month. That's just a couple pennies a day or more at podcastufo.com. The information's on the website. And it's a one-time sign-up. That's about it for me. Alejandro, how are you?
I am muy bueno. I'm good. How are you?
Doing well. I know it's been a little bit quiet. And right off the bat, I would like to... Yeah, really quiet. I'd like to say that just when we first connected, that I mentioned to you that someone contacted me today and said there's something going on in Turkey with UFOs. And you knew right away about that. And why don't we address that?
Yeah, because, you know, I, as many people know, look at and post UFO headlines from the media every day. And so I get to see what's out there. And it's just like kind of like we've talked about this growing expansion of the UK tabloids and their fake or goofy stories, you know, making headlines. So this is one, and it's spread, and sometimes it spreads to the mainstream. This one is a Secure Team 10 video. Often the tabloids don't seem to be concerned whether something's real or not. And as our listeners may know, and, you know, some people, 1 out of 10 people might say Secure Team 10 is real. They're not. Okay, I've been looking at this forever. There's tons of people who have made some videos to prove and demonstrate Secure Team 10 videos are hoaxes. So this is just another Secure Team 10 video that the UK tabloids picked up. But there's Headlines and Global News is a website, news website that has picked up and started to run these stories. There's one called something like iTech Post. The Inquisitor is another place that picks up these stories. So there are these places that are less discriminating when it comes to UFO stories, and they're just kind of, you know, posting these stories just to get hits, these clickbait, and it's really unfortunate.
Yeah, I want to ask you, does Secure Team 10 do the same thing as Third Phase of the Moon and, you know, salt in a real video now and then, or is it all hoaxes?
Not that I'm aware of, you know, and that's the issue is how do you know what's real and what's not, and that they're salting in any real stories. It would be a good idea to do that if they received some, I guess, so they can seem legitimate. But I mean, they're tainted sources, so I don't follow day by day everything they do, because if they're posting hoaxes, if they post something legitimate, it's already tainted. I mean, they're posted by a hoaxing site. So to me, then it's just unfortunately, if they are receiving real stuff occasionally and posting that, it's they're doing a disservice, because really they should send it to MUFON or someone else who is a legitimate organization and not hoaxing. I know, for instance, Secure Team 10, I don't think, you know, I've been watching them from the beginning, and their first set of videos were mostly related. They were military videos where they added UFOs to make it look like the UFOs were dropping the bombs or the military is fighting the UFOs and stuff like this. And they were entertainment. I don't think they set out to fool people. But they noticed they got so many hits that they let people believe, and then they began to actively – he even came clean. That's how we know so much. He even came clean at one point. But then, I'm sure viewership dropped off. And now they are really into making sure that people believe their things are real. So, in fact, I heard, and I have not confirmed this, that Twitter – was because of recent events, fake news has been being taken down by some social media, and Secure Team 10 had some posts allegedly taken down. And they said that you're just censoring us, but really they're fake news, and they do create fake news stories. So they may pretend like they're real, but unfortunately they're not.
Some people might think that we're starting off in a negative, way in the show. But what I'd really like is that the listener out there knows to beware. I think I mentioned I was contacted by Tim Mellon, who was, with the DOD at one time and was on this show as a guest. And he saw a Secure Team video and asked me, hey, is that possibly real? So, just keep that in mind. We're only mentioning this to help you, the listener, keep clear of, you can look at them all you want, but just realize that these are not legit.
Yeah, and that this recent story spread so much that I had I tweeted and sent out another message that, hey, remember, these are not real, and not so much for people who already know or just to bash on these guys, but to warn people that, hey, if you're really into this topic and you're looking for real stuff, then you have to be wary of this particular source. Right,
righto. So what happened? Did anything happen since Thanksgiving?
Yeah, we've got a couple stories that we've posted this week. One is that Roger Marsh from MUFON has sent in. One's from Texas, Houston in particular. This is a video of someone who was outside, had just stepped out of their vehicle, they said. It was 3:15 p.m. on November 23rd, so it was daylight, and they saw something reflecting in the sky. So they took video of it. They said it kind of seemed to hover, and then it moved. There was no sound, and they felt that it changed shape. The video, you'll have to take a look. I don't know that I think it might be just like a trash bag or something floating in the air, actually. It's something reflective that could be floating, but it has not been investigated yet, so it's still out for investigation on that one. However, a story that others have found a little more exciting is a group who were camping in California at Angels Camp, it's called.
Angels Camp.
And Angels Camp. This was in – is it really Angels?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Well, that's what I always knew it was because it's on the way to Yosemite. And
okay. So you're familiar with it.
Yes. Uh-huh.
The reason I ask is because most likely then there's a misspelling here in the story that I'll have to fix.
Could be.
But this sighting took place at 10:30 p.m., so it was dark on July 26, 2016. And these guys said that this thing had lit up their whole camp. So they noticed this object, both of these people. They watched it for a while. It kept getting brighter and brighter, they said, and closer until it lit up their camp, similar to a police helicopter. But they said this object they felt was still more than 90 or more than a mile away when it lit up their camp. So kind of weird. So it moved towards them. Then it split into two, and it was two objects. Then they say it appeared like it made a 90-degree turn and rapidly accelerated out of sight.
Do you know if the two spheres, or whatever it split into, were together when it took off and made the 90-degree angle turn?
They do say it was. This is how they put that exact statement. They said the object then appeared to split into two separate craft flying side by side, and 5 seconds later, followed by an abrupt 90-degree turn and sped off at a very high rate of acceleration, covering a distance of at least 5 miles in under half a second, all while making no noise.
Wow. Well, that's
Witnesses
a good one.
said they were not they had not partook in drugs or alcohol, and they were completely sober at the time of this happened. But so that one seems kind of interesting, huh?
Yeah. I'm sure they had no thoughts or no time to take a picture. I mean, obviously, that happens a lot.
Now, this one, the field investigator, Jerry Clinton with California MUFON, did do a little bit of investigation. He felt that these people were credible enough and said couldn't find anything like helicopters or celestial bodies that might have been the cause, and closed the case as an unknown.
Yeah. Well, something that's not going to make any noise, and reacts like that, I'm sure is not going to be a helicopter or some other thing. So, a drone can't split in two.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Well,
not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, right. Not yet, anyway. Well, hey, thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you.
All righty, and we'll be talking to you next week.
Cool. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, everyone, hang in there for the quick music break, and we'll be back with Larry Holcombe. Larry Holcombe, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be with you, Martin.
Yes. Now, Larry, I mentioned earlier that you are from Texas. Did I get that right?
No. Actually,
I'm sorry.
I am from Virginia, but my oldest son, daughter-in-law, and 9 grandchildren live in New Braunfels, which is just between Austin and San Antonio, or really closer to San Antonio. So Texas is sort of my adopted home state.
I got it.
I'm there quite often. So I was really interested in listening to Alejandro, who I'm an acquaintance of. We have met several times in Roswell at the festival, and I respect him highly because he, like myself, is a skeptic of these fake reports and videos and photographs and what have you that I think does tremendous harm to legitimate UFO research. So I think a great deal of Alejandro, and I completely agree with him, and that we've got to be very, very careful, especially today with the sophisticated Photoshop techniques and what have you that people use. Mm-hmm. So that was very interesting to me.
Oh, good. Yeah. No, you're right. And it's I hate to say it this way, but I only see it as the truth. It's only going to get worse, because as technology grows, it's going to be harder and harder to distinguish what's real and what isn't, So a lot of times you can go back in these old photos and things that you've looked at over the years, and, there's no tampering. There's no way to have tampered with individual photos or films from way back.
That's why I really call the 1940s, 1950s, and 60s the golden years of ufology or flying saucers, and I prefer the term flying saucers, to tell you the truth, because UFOs are so all-encompassing, and I think flying saucers sort of narrows the field down to what we're really talking about. But I think they were the golden years because we've got paper trails we can follow. And where today everything is electronic, it's very difficult to get legitimate information. But I spent a lot of time in presidential libraries, and the paper trails are very, very interesting. But they sort of wean as you go forward in time into modern times, into present time. And the paper trails you can get back from the 50s and the 60s and the late 40s is where I find so much information of great interest.
Yes, I do too. And you think about it, the way things used to be and the way they are now. We're in such a digital era that people like Thomas Jefferson had. There's records of over 13,000 letters that he has written, and that's just what they know of. I mean, many of them are disintegrated and gone. But, there was such a paper trail, and now, if we have, there's things that could happen that could wipe out all the digital, whether it's, something that happens from the sun or some type of electromagnetic situation, we could potentially wipe out a lot of our digital material. I'm sure a lot of it is protected. I hope it is, anyway.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people in politics today would like to have a lot of that stuff wiped out, but
that's true.
Not to deviate on to another subject.
Yeah, how do you know I deleted those emails? No, I'm not going to get into that.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Larry, for the person that's not familiar, I apologize for calling you from Texas, but I did see a picture of you from with that hat, and it did say Texas underneath it. But you're probably visiting your kids, as you said earlier.
I'm out there a lot. I'm out there a great deal. Yes, and it's my adopted home state. Perhaps my wife and I will be out there, move out there permanent one day.
Yeah. So can you give the listener kind of your background? You've been at this a long, long time, haven't you?
Yeah, it goes back to when I was a junior in high school. That was 1960. And it really goes back before that, when I was, I guess, 8 years old or so, when I saw the famous movie The Thing from outer space that scared the living daylights out of me. And but I became very interested in the subject. And if you remember back in those days, maybe I'm older than you are, so you don't remember, but it's there were a lot of flying saucer headlines, and they made big news, and people were very interested in the subject. And this movie came out, and as a youngster, I became interested in flying saucers. And then I read two of Donald Kehoe's books that I found in my high school library. Flying Saucers from Outer Space, if my memory serves me correctly, and Flying Saucers Are Real, I think, are the titles of the book. I may be wrong, but in any case, I was convinced of Kehoe's passion for the subject and his belief that the subject was being, flying saucers was being concealed by the Air Force. He had a great deal of Air Force contacts. Kehoe was a retired Marine Corps officer, pilot, and he had a great deal of contact within the Pentagon. And the editor of True Magazine, after Kehoe retired, he wrote articles for various magazines, but a lot of articles for True Magazine, which was then primarily a men's magazine. And he was called to New York. His office was in Washington, and Kehoe was called to New York by the editor of True Magazine, Ken W. Purdy, and said that he wanted, Don, I want you to write an article on this flying saucer issue. And Kehoe didn't want any parts of it. He thought it was pure baloney. Didn't want any parts of it. But he got into it, studied it, spent a year looking into it, went from a skeptic to a true believer because of what he was being told by his contacts in the Pentagon. And it came out wrote an article that came out in True Magazine in, I think it was January of 1950. The magazine actually hit the newsstands around Christmas of 1949, and it caused a tremendous uproar. As I understand it, today it is still the single largest selling magazine in magazine history for any 1 month. The article was "Flying Saucers from Outer Space" or "Flying Saucers Are Real" or something of that nature. I forget the exact title of the article, but it created an uproar, and immediately the Air Force was under the gun. Anyway, Kehoe went on to write several books, 2 of which I read. I was convinced by his passion and his belief that the Air Force was concealing information on flying saucers from the public. I saw then Kehoe go on the old Armstrong Circle Theater and debate an Air Force officer. And I thought, as a youngster, that this man is going to blow this subject wide open. As it turned out, Kehoe sat very quietly by while the Air Force came along with their standard spiel that there's nothing to it, they're all prosaic, there's nothing otherworldly about it. And toward the end of the broadcast, Kehoe tried to break in and get some words in, and his sound was cut off, or his sound you couldn't hear him talk. What was reported in the paper the next day was that the Air Force had brought in people. They had a man in the control booth that when Kehoe deviated from the prepared script that the Air Force brought in and said and demanded that the producers follow the script, and they caved into the Air Force. And Kehoe didn't want to go on, but he did go on because he thought he could get a few words in at the end of the program anyway, and that's when they cut their sound off. And this was reported in the paper the next day. From that point on, I realized that the Air Force was concealing information, that there was a cover-up, that the Air Force censored Kehoe. And from that point on, I became a true believer in the fact that flying saucers did exist. The Air Force knew a great deal about them, and they were concealing what they knew from the public. We can get into the Doug Locke story, which is a follow-up to this later. But
is that the helicopter?
No, this is no. We can,
No, that's fine.
But but that's how I got into it, and it became an avocation with me over the years, and I kept it to myself and to my family, my belief and my study of the subject, because the government had done a very good job of disinformation and making people that really believed that there was something to this flying saucer issue, they made them out to be kooks. So I kept very quiet about it and kept it to myself as I continued to study the scientific end of this subject rather than the kook fringe, which there's a large, as you know, large kook fringe on both sides of this issue, both with believers and skeptics or debunkers. And so that's really how I got into it. And then when I took early retirement in 2006, I wrote a novel, and I used my knowledge of flying saucers and UFOs and the government history of the government background cover-up as the basis to the plot of this thriller or murder mystery, what have you. And that was picked up, was seen by the UFO Museum, the International UFO Museum and Library in Roswell. They liked it. They invited me out as a speaker and an author in 2011. And then after talking to Stan Friedman and Alejandro and several others, that Antonio Hunis, who was worked with Alejandro at that time, put me in touch with a producer of a TV documentary that from 1975, made-for-TV documentary, NBC TV documentary on UFOs that obviously had government support and supported the theory that flying saucers or UFOs were extraterrestrial. And anyway, that's a very quick, rough nutshell of my background into research into flying saucers / UFOs.
Right. And I was going to ask you, using the term flying saucers, now what do you make of all the triangle UFOs? Can't really call them saucers.
Well, I use the term flying saucers for one reason. When you say UFOs, most ufologists will say that 95% of UFOs are something prosaic. Experimental aircraft, people misidentifying aircraft, people seeing balloons, all sorts of things. And that's correct. That's correct. 95% are something prosaic. It's the 5% we're interested in. The problem is when you tell the general population, people that have not studied the subject, that 95% can be explained, they automatically think, well, if 95% can be explained, then the other 5% can probably be explained with a little more research. That's not true. That's totally not true. To me, the 95% become 100% of prosaic objects that can be explained. The 5% become 100% of true flying saucer sightings. Now, flying saucers may be saucer-shaped, they may be cigar-shaped, they may be triangular-shaped, they may come in all sorts of shapes, but I use the term flying saucer to differentiate between what is prosaic and what is true, unexplained objects that operate beyond the laws of known physics that are seen by respectable people, capable people, military officers, pilots, military pilots, civilian pilots, commercial pilots, police officers, people that can give really good, concise reports of objects that bear no resemblance to anything known and performed beyond what we consider the accepted laws of physics. So that's why I use the term flying saucers, why I like the term flying saucers rather than UFOs.
Well, I totally understand, and I know a lot of people are using the term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. I know NICAP, for one, and Richard Haynes likes to use that term for the very same reason that you just mentioned, basically to differentiate the two. So you have actually seen the before and after of the Robertson panel because you were interested in this all the way back in 1950. 1953 comes along, the Robertson panel comes along and says, too much is going on. We have to basically explain these things away and, belittle people and So did you actually see any type of transformation that you can actually remember?
I think the Robertson panel, I think you're exactly right. I think the Robertson panel came about because of the what's become known as the Great Washington Merry-Go-Round of 1952 in July, 2 weekend nights in July, and I forget the dates, July 20s, I don't know, but two weekend nights when Washington was overflown by UFOs or flying saucers. That were tracked on radar at Washington National Airport and at Andrews Air Force Base. They were in communication, both the towers at Washington National and Andrews Air Force Base. Jets were scrambled on the first weekend night. When they arrived, the objects on the radar took off. The following weekend, jets were scrambled again, and the objects didn't take off. In fact, one pilot became very unnerved when several of these objects started to close in and surround his aircraft. And when he radioed, what am I to do, meaning should I fire at them, the objects took off. There was a major hubbub, a major, this story was in the papers all over the world. And the Air Force held a news conference. I think they said it was the biggest news conference the Air Force had held since the Second World War, which it wasn't the Air Force during the Second World War, the Army Air Corps, but anyway. Major news conference, General Sanford said that, acknowledged that people had been seeing very unusual things, but he went on to write them off as temperature inversions. The radar operators were incensed to think that they couldn't tell the difference between, here they had the lives of thousands of people in their hands as controllers, and they couldn't tell the difference between an atmospheric condition and a hard target. And these definitely were hard targets. Famous atmospheric physicist, Dr. James E. McDonald of the University of Arizona, one of my heroes in this field, chimed in and said, "This is ridiculous. These were not temperature inversions." And McDonald spent about 6 years studying this before his life ended, unfortunately. But anyway, the Robertson panel was formed because President Truman simply told his Air Force aide, General Landry, that I want to know what the hell's going on. Just that simple. Truman was very blunt. And in fact, except I think he knew what was going on, but he told Landry to go ahead and find out what was going on, and they convened this panel, which turned out to be the Robertson panel, which was the first of several farces as far as investigation by officials into this this flying saucer or UFO question. And the Robertson panel brought numerous people before them. In one case, there's, and I think I have this correct, Martin, the Tremonton, Utah film that was taken by a warrant officer in Tremonton, Utah, of flying saucers was examined by the Navy Photo Interpretation Laboratory. They spent 1,000 hours on it, looking at it and examining it, and went before the Robertson panel and said, we don't know what it is, what they are. We know this. They're not airplanes. They're not birds. They're not balloons. They're not anything that we can identify. They are self-luminous. Underline, self-luminous. But we don't know what they are. The Robertson panel, in their findings, which came out in the what is now called the Durant report. Durant was on the panel, and he wrote the report. And they said that the panel found that they were birds. So it was the beginning of the cover-up, the big cover-up that we all, of those of us that have studied this subject, or many of us that have studied this subject, believe that has been going on since the early 1950s. So I think that is a long way of answering your question as to, was the Robertson panel the beginning of the cover-up, and I think, yes, it was.
Now, there's always been a lot of speculation on this show from different people on what the government does and does not know, and I've always had kind of the maybe my attitude's changed a little. I think that is true. There is some type of cover-up, but also, my thoughts have sort of changed along the lines with maybe they don't even know what it is. And because they can't, the only reason for the cover-up is because maybe they feel vulnerable to not being able to explain what's going on.
I think that's very possible. I would put that at one end of the scale as being factual, and at the other end of the scale that they have a great deal of knowledge of what is going on and have retrieved UFO artifacts. So I don't discount what you're saying at all. That it could very well be. I mean, if from 1947 to 2016, the Air Force still cannot control objects that are flying through our sovereign airspace, cannot intercept them, cannot do anything about them, certainly they wouldn't want to go before the public. The government would not want to go before the public and say, we admit that our airspace and the sovereign airspace of other countries around the globe are being violated by craft, and we don't know what they are. We don't know what they want. We have no defenses against them. They certainly wouldn't want to do that. So from what you're saying, yes, that's a very viable position. On the other hand, if Roswell, which I happen to accept is I believe is fact, that we have recovered alien craft, which and I believe that to be a fact. And I will add this: I don't think that these are any craft that flew across the vastness of space and came here and crashed because of a thunderstorm or what have you. I think that they were probably expendable probes, but that's something else. I'm getting off the subject. But yeah, I think that I think your position is certainly valid and one that it could be proven to be true.
No, I definitely want to talk about the probe idea because I understand that because that's what, that's our human nature would be to definitely send a probe first. And one of the things I forgot to mention here earlier, a couple of things, is I can take calls, the later part of the show, but also that we do have a chat room and occasionally listeners will post a question. Also, we have a forum. And in the forum, there's a place for questions, and I just opened that up now, and I'm looking, and there's 11 questions in there for you, which I'll get to when I can on some of them. So going back, I wanted to talk to you quickly about the True magazine, because it seems to me my friends, when I was growing up as a young kid, and in the 70s, I remember my friend's dad used to get True magazine, and I think they were actually posting things about UFOs at that time. I mean, I think I remember that. Do you know, did they continue on with that subject?
Oh, sure. It was, I can't recall all of the magazine articles. Obviously, I was, growing up then and getting out of high school and had met my future wife and having children and what have you. So you couldn't stay but so focused on that subject. But yeah, I think that the subject of flying saucers and later UFOs continued on until True shut down, and really I don't know right offhand what the time frame would be, but the subject of flying saucers or UFOs really became a giggles subject sometime in probably the 60s, the late 50s and the 60s, and when we started sending rockets up and attempting to develop a moon landing, which we did, of course, successfully. And the subject of UFOs became sort of a giggle factor. And again, I think this was because of what the government had done, the disinformation the government had put out on this subject, and played a large role in making the subject a giggle factor, for lack of better words. So yeah, I think that it was prominent. Certainly through the 50s and into the early 60s anyway. Yeah,
going back to the possible government cover-up, first of all, I want to mention that I saw what I highly recommend, a great movie called Arrival, and I'm not going to really give any spoiler other than the fact that the number one question written was something you said very similar to it, and is, what do they want from us? And that's, I'm sure, what the number one question would be, and what the question, whether it has been answered to the people that know or not, is really puzzling. And we do have a question in the chat room: is what out of the different government wings like NSA, FBI, and so forth do you think played the biggest role in the UFO cover-up?
Technology. I think that. Again, I believe that we have recovered alien craft, probes, if you will, and I think that these craft are obviously are far advanced from what we had at the time, and I think that we had them, we got them, and we certainly didn't want to share the secrets of whatever they were that we were trying to uncover with any other country, friend or foe. We had this, and I think other governments have retrieved this. I think the Russians, the Soviet Union at the time, had recovered similar objects. And I think that it's, people speculate, well, if the government came out and said we're being visited by extraterrestrials, the financial structure of the country would collapse and religion would collapse, and I think that's all baloney. We've lived through the nuclear age. I don't think that would happen. I think that any government that has recovered these objects, they want to study the technology and understand the technology, and they don't want to share it with anybody. And it is extremely highly classified, as a number of well-known people have said, the most highly classified subject on the planet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So do you think there is a branch that, you mentioned technology, but do you think NSA would be involved? Do you think the Air Force, what part of, let's say, the United States government would be taking part in a type of cover-up? Or would you think it would be just the Air Force?
That's a very good question. Intelligence is highly compartmentalized, as you know, and my best guess, and I hope it's an educated guess, is that there is one group probably buried deep within the Central Intelligence Agency that is a very small group of people that are involved in this area. This goes back to the early years and discussions of Truman and Majestic 12, and which is disputed by a lot of people, but I happen to buy into it. That group still exists in probably some of the form, some of the name, but I think that all branches of the service and the intelligence community are involved in it at a very high level to some degree, and on a very compartmentalized basis. And this includes the military-industrial complex. At the very highest levels in contractors, such as McDonnell Douglas, Boeing, which is McDonnell Douglas, Lockheed Martin, TRW Systems. These folks at the very highest level have some involvement in this phenomenon. And but I think that there is within the government, whether it's the CIA, and I think the CIA is most likely, that there is deep within that agency a very small group that controls all of this information. Now, can I prove that? No, I can't. But from my study and from my years of research, that's where the compass points, and I think that's I think that's what we are. And people ask me, well, what about the president? So the president's going to reveal, what president might reveal this? Would if Hillary Clinton was elected, would she have revealed it? I don't think the presidents know. I don't think that they're in the loop of knowledge unless they are selected to be in the loop of knowledge. I don't think they have the level of classification and this is, you're talking about top secret, but for people that don't understand it, there are many, many levels above top secret. And there are many levels above top secret that go into all sorts of different areas, nuclear weapons, what have you. And this is probably as highly classified and compartmentalized as any subject within our government and probably many other governments.
Yes, I mentioned earlier I had Chris Mellon on, and he was with the Department of Defense. He had one of the highest clearances. He's interested in the UFO topic, and he said that if the president actually demanded to know what was going on, then people would tell him whatever they knew. But you mentioned the fact that it's compartmentalized, and I'm sure that it would be hard to get to the right person to speak to that would know, because so much of it must be on a need-to-know situation. So,
well, it is, and presidents come and go, and let's touch on one other thing here while we're on this subject. People tell me all the time, well, the government can't keep secrets. And I tell them, baloney. The government can keep secrets. The government keeps secrets. I mean, we have secret aerial platforms flying out of famous Area 51 that are probably 50, 60, 70 years beyond anything that we know about now. The Manhattan Project, the development of the atomic bomb, was kept secret from the public. A whole city was built around outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, at Oak Ridge. When there was a building there, I understand, that was a mile long. It was a complete city. And the people in Knoxville, which was 30, 40 miles away, never knew it existed. There was enough power being generated from the dam at the Tennessee River to power 10% of the United States in the development of the atomic bomb, and nobody knew it. So to say that our government can't keep secrets is foolish. We can't keep political secrets, but political secrets are entirely different. Mm-hmm. You laugh, and I know what you're thinking, but that's true. Political secrets are entirely different from secrets that involve national security and national defense, and we are very good at that. So yes, we can keep secrets.
Yeah. Earlier you said that you thought that it's possible that we are being visited by probes or drones or something like that, and I think that's also a very good possibility myself. But one of the things, how would that explain the Roswell crash and the supposed entities that people saw, the alien bodies?
I think that, during the post-war years in the late 1940s and early 1950s, New Mexico and the Four Corners area, but primarily New Mexico at White Sands, and you had Los Alamos, labs at Los Alamos and Sandia were located there. And we were conducting atomic tests. We were launching V-2 rockets with the help of Project Paperclip Germans that were brought to the United States and housed there. We were experimenting with very sophisticated radar systems, primarily radar systems to protect Sandia and Los Alamos, because we didn't have, at that time, we didn't have the dew line up in Alaska to protect us from incoming Soviet aircraft. So we were experimenting with those three rockets, but primarily nuclear tests. So the stories that have leaked out from many prominent scientists said that the appearance of objects, flying saucers, if you will, every time a test was going to be conducted was expected. They became so common that they didn't pay a lot of attention to them. So you can imagine that if we were being watched by an intelligence, non-earthly intelligence, that they would be conceivably concerned with what we were doing in the way of nuclear tests and sending rockets into space, because they, obviously they could see that we were growing up. Our scientific achievements were advancing rapidly, and perhaps they were very concerned about our nuclear experiments. Again, this is speculation. We don't have any alien to sit down and talk to us and lecture us and tell us what they were thinking. But this is, I think, is basic logic. Maybe, but that's, it could be something far deeper than that. But that would make sense. That's why we were seeing this explosion of UFO or flying saucer sightings in that time period. And it would make sense that they would not come down here with their large craft. And for some reason, I hate to use the term motherships, but, for lack of a better word, I could say aircraft carriers, but motherships that would orbit the Earth maybe as far out or far away as the moon and send these probes down to see what we were doing. And within these probes, it has been reported that there were entities, alien bodies found. And I like the thesis that these alien bodies were engineered beings. They were expendable. The probes were expendable. And the engineered beings within these probes were really part of the craft, really part of the guidance system of the craft. You really have to think outside of the envelope, that if you're dealing with civilizations or a civilization or civilizations that could be 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years more advanced than we are, you really have to think that, to say outside of the envelope, to think outside of the entire package, to understand that we could be dealing with beings that we simply don't understand. That's beyond our comprehension, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I'm not making a very good point of this, but it's...
well, I totally get what you're saying. You know, I mean, it's kind of like we can actually clone now, and who knows where that could lead. Could that lead to expendable beings in the future? Who knows? You know, I mean, it just, you know, right now our moral responsibility is... and a lot of people would be totally against something like that, but you never know 1,000 years from now, 2,000 years from now, if that would be just, you know, something that it's done.
Look where we've come in the last 100 years.
Right. So that's it for the free part of the show. Thank you for listening. And remember, if you want to listen to the full show and you can't afford to help us out, it's no problem. You can just listen on podcastufo.com every Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or on the Dark Matter Digital Network that plays on Thursdays from 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Standard Time as well. If you can support the show, I'll tell you, hour 2 is really great this evening with Larry Holcombe. He talks about the Doug Locke story, which was actually, he spoke with Doug Locke back in 1960, who basically was supporting the Roswell incident that, of course, didn't really come back out until I think around 1980. So it's a fascinating story, plus a lot more. And for $2 or more a month, you can listen to the archives and also the full shows in your media player as well. Thanks so much for listening. Next week, pretty excited, we have X-Files Dean Hagelin coming on the show. That should be a lot of fun. And we have a lot of nice guests lined up in the future. So thanks so much, and we'll be back next week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.